Alright guys, welcome back to another MCreator tutorial. So today we're going to be looking at damage values and stuff. So we're going to be looking at the damage element and how that applies to the procedures. So let's get started and start looking at the element first, and then we'll get into how the procedure blocks work. Alright, so to get this particular window, you need to go to your workspace and then go to mod elements plus sign, and then we go down to the damage type, and then you create a name for it. Once you've created the name, you'll have three main settings here, and then some message settings, which will allow you to customize the death messages based on a few different factors. We'll get into that in just a second. So the first one is exhaustion amount. So this one basically covers how much exhaustion the player will get when they basically have this damage applied to them. So for example, the higher the exhaustion, the more food that is going to be used. The second variable is, or second setting, is basically based on does it scale with difficulty. So if it is something that scales with difficulty, like some particular damage things, then you can set this with certain values. There's always, and then when caused by living entity non-player. So there's a few different options here for those particular ones. What this means is it will actually scale with the game mode. So if it's on easy, peaceful, normal, or hard, or I think possibly hard mode. So those would basically be how it's basically scaling for the difficulty, not so much the the particular game or anything like that. The last setting that we have here is hertz. So this is basically the sound that's going to be playing when you're when the person or player takes damage. So you can select a few options here. Down below we have messages, so let's cover that next. So messages are pretty simple. We have a couple variable ones which are used with a greater than and less than symbol, and then there is three variables inside of these. We have player, attacker, and item. These are basically going to display the type of variable that it's for. So for example, some of them support it, some don't. This one for the death message, item death message, it supports player, attacker, and item, where the normal death message just supports player, and the assisted death message, which is basically when something has assisted in the death, like a mob has helped push another mob off the cliff or something. Well, then you have the player and attacker for that one. You can basically fill out any other message in here that you want. So basically anything before, after, it's basically just a string. So you can use those variables wherever you want, basically. That's basically all there is to the death type element, so we don't need to cover too much about that. Now that we kind of understand where the death message part is, we can start looking at the actual damage properties in the procedure. So let's get into that next. All right, so we have a few different tabs around here. There's some of them, like entities and stuff, may have their own death particular ones. So this one is applying damage. So you might find some damage values in other tabs as well, so just keep that in mind. It's not specifically to this tab. There might be other tabs that have the supported blocks for it. So we have damage procedures. These are the ones that relate to that particular trigger. So if we select the damage source of type, we can see that there's all the ones that are built into the game here. So like anvil, which when the anvil falls and it hits the player or entity, that's basically the damage that happens. There's fall damage, so fall, and then a whole bunch of other things. There's also one called generic, I believe. This one is basically just the standard standard damage that you would give. Most settings are tweaked for this particular one, just because it's like the general one that you can use. So if you want more specific different damage types, and there's other ones. So things like the entity one, and then we have damage here. When we deal damage, we can actually set the generic one, or we can set a custom damage as well, and then it will print out those messages based on what the damage type was. So again, that's really useful if you have a specific mechanic like a block that might apply damage when maybe the entity comes in contact with it. You can actually deal damage through that particular damage type and have a custom message print out based on that if they get damaged. This works for players as well. All right, so let's talk about the Minecraft damage one, the provided damage source. Now, some triggers might support this dependency. If we go on entity is attacked, we can see down here on the dependency side, we have one that is called damage source. So if we go ahead and apply this to here, we can see that we get the damage source dependency as well as the entity for this one because we have this block here. So some blocks might require, or not really require, but will have this particular dependency. In most cases, you'll probably not be using it. In that case, you would use something like your damage blocks that you have up here, like this one instead. So, for example, you would have the damage and then have anvil, and then that's not going to give you the dependency, so this will work in most cases. There's other blocks in here that are basically like damage source, and then we have source entity that allows us to get the particular entity that's basically attacking it. So this requires a source entity type. We do have that in this particular procedure. There is damage source type, and then we can select our type, source entity, and then immediate source entity. This would be for things like arrows and things like that. So basically like a projectile of some sort. So if this does require another dependency, this one right here, immediate source entity. As you can see, we have both source entity and immediate source entity. So we can use this block if we wanted to. We would basically go like this, and then you can see that we have immediate source entity, and we can set our damage type to something like that, and we can see that we have both of these. So we can target something like an anvil. In this case, that wouldn't work. Something like a arrow or something like that would probably be more suitable because that's a projectile, and that would be the source entity, I think. So that's one method of doing it. There's other blocks here like getting the cause of the source entity. This is a null, it can return null. So you would have to make sure that you check if that value is not null. The entity directly caused. We have exhaustion value, so we can get the exhaustion value of the damage. And we also have is caused in creative mode. There's a whole bunch of other ones here, so just to experiment with them. There's also the damage type. So this is a tag, so you could also tag the damages as well and have it basically have its own group. So you can tag multiple damages and do like provided damage source or something like that, and then apply damage or something. So this is really handy if you want to group the damages together and then run something based on that. If you want to test for a particular damage type, like if the damage is something when something happens, you can actually go to logic, I believe, and then there's one down here. So this will allow you to test for if the damage provided damage source is something like anvil, and you can use this as a condition. So for example, if the damage that is being applied is anvil, then we could basically run something else here. So that would be one block that's quite useful. And you also have your standard return values and your call values and dependencies. So you can call these dependencies specifically and call a return value here. Now we don't actually have a trigger for this, like a variable that we can use. So you would be basically returning a value directly, like provided damage source or a custom damage one that you've created. Like for example, if we go over here, we can actually return a damage like this. So this would work as well if we wanted to return a certain value. for example, if you had a lot of procedures and stuff and you wanted to return different types of damage, you could have your condition above here. You could have multiple versions and then return something based on that condition. So you'd have something like that, maybe return generic at the end. So generic, and that would allow you to return different values based on different conditions. All right, so that's about it. There isn't really anything else outside of these ones that we really didn't actually cover, but I encourage you to experiment with them, print out the values, see what's going on, and I will see you guys in the next video. If you are new to my channel, don't forget to subscribe, comment down below, rate the video, and if you want a place to hang out with other MCreator users, I have a Discord server that will be in the description, and I will see you guys next time. Peace out.